I'd like to present to you Mr. and Mrs. Tepe.
Tonight, a dentist and his wife mysteriously shot to death in their Columbus, Ohio home, the same one where they were married 5 years ago. Police say they found the bodies of Spencer and Monique Tepe during a welfare check. Their children, ages 1 and 4, unharmed in a separate room, family confirm.
There's a body. There's a body inside? Yeah.
It all started around 9 a.m. Tuesday when Spencer's boss called 911 concerned he didn't show up to work.
He is always on time, and he would contact us if there was any issues whatsoever. We're very, very concerned because this is very out of character.
Less than an hour later, a 911 call from outside the house.
No one noticed anything unusual that morning. A routine missed appointment triggered a welfare check, the kind that usually ends with an apology and a closed door. Instead, it opened into silence that did not fit the house it belonged to. 2 adults were inside. 2 children were still there. Time had passed, but not enough to erase the order of what had occurred. At first, the details appeared straightforward, until timelines failed to align, relationships resurfaced, and decisions made years earlier began to matter again. The people involved were educated, established, and familiar with structure. Nothing suggested chaos. Nothing suggested urgency. Yet someone had arrived. Someone had left. And whatever happened inside that home did not begin there. This story is not about a single moment of violence. It is about patterns, access, and what can remain hidden until it no longer can. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. When the deaths of Monique Tepe and her husband Spencer Tepe became public, the case was initially presented as a domestic tragedy discovered during a routine welfare check. 2 adults were found deceased inside their Columbus, Ohio home. Their 2 young children were also inside the residence and were physically unharmed. Within hours, the incident was classified as a homicide investigation. What was not immediately disclosed was how much time had passed between the estimated time of death and the discovery of the bodies, or how investigators were already narrowing their focus before the public narrative fully formed. Early media reports relied heavily on brief law enforcement statements, which emphasized the location of the crime and the absence of an immediate threat to the public. This framing shaped public perception before many underlying facts were known. As more information emerged, it became clear that the case was not centered on a spontaneous event. Instead, investigators began examining prior relationships, geographic movement, and historical conflicts. This raised a central question that continues to define the case. Was this outcome the result of a sudden breakdown, or the conclusion of a process that unfolded over years? Monique Tepe was raised in Ohio, in a family environment described by relatives as structured and supportive. From an early age, she demonstrated consistent patterns of responsibility and long-term planning. She pursued higher education with a focus on child development and education, working in childcare settings while continuing her studies. Her daily life was organized around schedules, routines, and defined roles. Friends and family later described her as methodical and dependable, particularly in caregiving roles. These characteristics extended beyond work into her personal life, where she maintained detailed planning around household responsibilities, finances, and parenting. Monique met her first husband as a young adult. The relationship progressed into marriage, but over time, accounts from those close to her indicated growing imbalance in decision-making and control. Disagreements reportedly centered on autonomy, communication, and long-term planning. The marriage ended in divorce. Court records and family statements indicate that the separation was not entirely clean, with lingering disputes that extended beyond the legal dissolution of the marriage. While some concerns were formally documented, others were shared privately with friends and relatives rather than through official channels. These unresolved issues did not disappear after the divorce. Instead, they became part of the background context that investigators would later revisit when reconstructing events leading up to the killings. Following the divorce, Monique focused on reestablishing stability. She secured employment, managed her finances independently, and reorganized her support system. Those close to her noted clearer boundaries in her personal relationships and a more deliberate approach to decision-making. She maintained regular contact with family and prioritized predictable routines. There were no public indications during this period that she anticipated a future threat, but she remained cautious in how she structured her life and relationships. Spencer Teep was a medical professional with advanced training and a demanding work schedule. He was regarded by colleagues as reliable and technically competent. His profession required long hours, precise planning, and adherence to strict protocols. Publicly, his life appeared stable and conventional. Privately, like many professionals in high-responsibility fields, he managed ongoing stress related to work demands and time constraints. Monique and Spencer met after her divorce. Their relationship progressed steadily, culminating in marriage. They established a household together and raised 2 children. Their domestic life followed structured routines, aligned with Spencer's work schedule and Monique's background in caregiving. There were no widely reported indications of instability within their marriage. However, investigators later examined whether external pressures, unrelated to the marriage itself, were affecting the household in ways not visible to outsiders. In the weeks preceding the killings, the household followed predictable daily patterns. Communication with extended family and colleagues remained consistent. There were no publicly known reports of disturbances or requests for assistance. Investigators later analyzed phone records, digital communications, and location data to identify deviations from normal behavior. This included examining travel patterns, unusual gaps in communication, and financial activity that did not align with established routines. At the time, none of these details were publicly disclosed, but they formed the foundation of the investigative timeline. The last confirmed communications from Monique and Spencer occurred before a period of silence that raised concern. An estimated time of death was later determined based on forensic analysis, though exact details were not immediately released. Investigators reconstructed movements in and around the home using physical evidence and external data sources. This reconstruction suggested that the events unfolded within a defined window rather than over an extended period. Concern arose when Spencer failed to appear for work without notice. A welfare check was requested, prompting law enforcement to go to the residence. Upon entry, officers discovered both adults deceased and secured the scene. The children were located alive inside the home. Emergency procedures were followed, and the residence was treated as an active crime scene. The positioning of the bodies and the condition of the scene led investigators to classify the case as a targeted homicide rather than an accident or medical emergency. Certain conclusions were drawn immediately, while others required further forensic confirmation. Authorities differentiated between evidence that was directly observed and inferences that required additional corroboration. The children were inside the home for an undetermined period following the deaths. After discovery, they were removed from the scene and placed under protective care. Custodial decisions were handled through legal and child welfare systems, with priority given to their immediate safety and long-term placement. Law enforcement has stated that the children were not physically harmed. Initial theories considered multiple possibilities, but quickly ruled out random intrusion and murder-suicide based on available evidence. Investigators focused on individuals with prior access, motive, or unresolved conflicts. Within the first 48 hours, authorities collected forensic evidence, reviewed surveillance footage, and analyzed travel records. Some findings were withheld from the public to preserve the integrity of the investigation. Investigators eventually focused on a suspect with a prior relationship to Monique. This individual's background, professional history, and geographic movements became central to the case. Authorities examined travel before and after the killings as well as financial and legal pressures that may have contributed to motive. Behavioral patterns identified by investigators suggested escalation rather than a spontaneous act. Charges were filed based on accumulated evidence, though the case remains subject to judicial proceedings. As with all criminal cases, allegations remain allegations until proven in court. This case continues to develop. What is publicly known represents only part of the evidentiary record, while the remainder will be tested through the legal process. The identification of the suspect did not come from a single piece of evidence, but from a convergence of digital records, travel data, and historical context. Investigators began by reconstructing who had access, motive, and the ability to move undetected across state lines within the relevant time frame. Attention turned quickly to Monique Tepe's former husband, whose name appeared repeatedly in legal and personal records connected to her past. Law enforcement examined travel logs showing the suspect had left his home state shortly before the estimated time of the killings and returned shortly afterward. Cell phone data placed his device moving in a pattern consistent with long-distance travel during the narrow window in question. Surveillance footage from public locations along the route further supported this movement. While no footage showed the act itself, the cumulative data established presence within proximity of the crime scene. Charging documents cite digital evidence, including phone pings, vehicle data, and financial transactions that align with the reconstructed timeline. Investigators also relied on prior legal disputes and documented conflict between the suspect and Monique, which prosecutors argue established motive. Firearm ownership records and ballistic testing are referenced, though full forensic details have not been released publicly. At this stage, the case includes both concrete and circumstantial evidence. Concrete elements include travel records, device location data, and the timing of movements. Circumstantial components include motive interpretation, behavioral analysis, and the absence of alternative suspects with comparable access and opportunity. Prosecutors maintain that the totality of evidence forms a coherent narrative of premeditation. The defense has responded by challenging the interpretation of digital evidence, emphasizing that location data does not equate to presence at the crime scene. Defense filings suggest alternative explanations for travel and argue that motive alone cannot establish guilt. The legal strategy appears focused on undermining the certainty of timelines and disputing prosecutorial inferences drawn from prior relationship conflict. Initial media coverage framed the case as a tragic domestic incident involving a married couple found deceased in their home. Early reports emphasized the discovery of the bodies, the presence of children in the house, and the shock to the local community. At that stage, details were limited and speculation was restrained by the absence of a named suspect. Following the arrest, the narrative shifted significantly. Media outlets redirected focus toward the suspect's background, professional status, and prior marriage to Monique. Headlines increasingly highlighted the former relationship, casting the crime within a framework of long-term interpersonal conflict rather than an isolated act. Certain details received sustained attention, including the suspect's profession, interstate travel, and the timing of the arrest. Other aspects received comparatively less scrutiny, such as procedural decisions made during the divorce, custody arrangements, and the extent of prior court involvement. The emphasis on personal background often overshadowed systemic questions about prevention and oversight. Online speculation expanded rapidly after the suspect was named. Social media discussions attempted to reconstruct motives, analyze body language in court appearances, and fill informational gaps with unverified claims. Law enforcement and prosecutors cautioned against drawing conclusions beyond the evidence formally presented. Verified facts remain confined to court filings, official statements, and documented records, while many circulating claims lack substantiation. Despite the arrest, significant questions remain unresolved. One of the most notable gaps concerns the precise sequence of events inside the home. While investigators have established an estimated time of death, the exact order of actions and duration of the incident have not been publicly clarified. Additional uncertainty surrounds the suspect's movements during specific intervals, where digital data is less precise. Short gaps in location tracking leave room for dispute, particularly regarding proximity to the residence at critical moments. These gaps are central to the defense's argument and will likely be contested at trial. Certain forensic details remain undisclosed, including full ballistic analysis, the method used to enter and exit the home, and whether any defensive actions occurred. Authorities have stated that some information has been withheld to preserve the integrity of ongoing proceedings. The case also raises questions about intervention systems. Prior legal conflicts existed, yet no mechanism appears to have prevented escalation. Whether warning signs were formally documented, informally acknowledged, or overlooked remains unclear. The effectiveness of restraining orders, custody evaluations, and post-divorce monitoring has not been fully examined in public records. The suspect is currently in custody awaiting trial, facing multiple counts of aggravated murder. Pre-trial hearings are ongoing, focusing on evidence admissibility, jurisdictional issues, and procedural motions. No trial date has been finalized, though proceedings are expected to extend over a prolonged period due to the volume of digital and forensic evidence. Possible outcomes include conviction on all counts, partial conviction, acquittal, or plea negotiations, though prosecutors have not indicated any intention to reduce charges. The burden remains on the state to demonstrate premeditation and direct responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. Critical elements still requiring proof include definitive placement of the suspect at the crime scene, linkage between the firearm used and the suspect, and corroboration of intent. The defense is expected to continue challenging evidentiary certainty rather than disputing that a crime occurred. This case illustrates how control, access, and escalation can operate over extended periods rather than emerging suddenly. The events under examination did not originate on the day of the killings, but were shaped by prior relationships, legal decisions, and unresolved disputes. It also demonstrates how private histories intersect with public violence, particularly when personal conflict extends beyond separation or divorce. The presence of formal legal processes does not necessarily neutralize risk when underlying dynamics remain unaddressed. Finally, the case underscores the importance of transparency. Accurate timelines, clear evidentiary standards, and public accountability are essential, not only for determining guilt or innocence, but for understanding how similar cases might be prevented. Until all facts are fully examined in court, significant aspects of this case remain incomplete, awaiting clarification through due process.